Hello everyone. I hope you are comfortable where you are right now, maybe lying down or sitting with a warm drink, ready to drift into something slow and curious. Have you ever wondered what it truly meant to be the wife of a Roman emperor? To walk through marble halls where every glance and every whisper carried weight beyond imagination? Today, we are going to explore that world, the world of palaces, politics, gossip, and endless ceremonies, but not just in the way of lists or facts. We will walk together through the very life of a Roman empress, seeing it through her eyes, hearing the soft shuffle of servants, the clink of goblets, and the quiet secrets that no history book always tells. Before we begin fully, I am curious, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? It's fascinating to think of this story reaching you from thousands of miles away, across centuries, bringing you into a world that is long gone, yet somehow still alive in our imagination. Imagine waking in a room filled with the early light of the Mediterranean sun, its rays striking gold upon rich tapestries and the polished floors, brushing against the face of an empress as she stirs from slumber. The scent of oils, mixed with the subtle perfume of jasmine and myrrh, fills the air, a quiet reminder of her rank and of the care always surrounding her. Servants, silent yet attentive, move gracefully, laying out clothing, preparing her tunics embroidered with gold thread, heavy yet elegant, designed to signal her position without saying a word. She dresses slowly, feeling the smoothness of silk against her skin, the weight of jewelry in her hair, and the golden pins that secure it into elaborate braids, each style chosen not just for beauty, but for power, for message, for control. Every detail matters because every eye in the court watches, and every whisper can travel faster than the swiftest messenger. Breakfast is rarely simple. Unlike the common folk, whose meals might be humble and repetitive, the Empress enjoys a careful orchestration of flavors, a mixture of imported delicacies and local offerings. Fresh bread, baked daily, still warm, layered with honey from the countryside, soft cheese, olives plucked from ancient groves, and fruits so ripe they seem almost sculpted by nature itself. Sometimes, exotic spices arrive from far-flung corners of the empire, cinnamon or black pepper, their aroma filling the dining room as she sips wine diluted with water, as was customary, or fresh goat's milk, sweet and cool. Yet meals are never purely about nourishment. They are theater moments where power is displayed subtly. The way she lifts her cup, the choice of seat, the glance cast at her attendants, the quiet nod acknowledging a loyal face among many. Even the simple act of eating becomes a lesson in etiquette, a subtle exercise in influence, because in Rome, nothing is ever just as it seems. After breakfast, the day often unfolds with audiences, visits, and ceremonies. Some are public, grand spectacles where she must smile, gesture, and speak with grace that conceals calculation. Others are private, where she walks in the gardens of the palace, letting the fountains murmur secrets to her as she observes the careful planting of roses, the paths lined with marble statues of gods and heroes long dead. Here, in these quiet spaces, she finds a moment of herself, even while knowing that eyes might be watching from hidden balconies or corridors. Conversations are never casual. Even a simple chat with a friend or servant may contain layers of meaning, advice, or subtle warning. And always, there are letters, messages delivered by swift-footed runners, some innocent, some veiled with threats or rumors, each one requiring thought, discretion, and sometimes a display of clever amusement or gentle dismissal. Entertainment in the palace is never ordinary. Music flows endlessly, not just from lyres or flutes, but from musicians trained to play complex harmonies that rise and fall like the heartbeat of Rome itself. Dancers, trained to perfection, move like liquid across mosaic floors, telling stories of gods, heroes, and legendary victories. Sometimes, the Empress joins in quiet singing, her voice modest yet clear, a way to remember youth or to practice the arts expected of someone of her rank. Feasts can stretch for hours, stretching into evenings where the soft light of oil lamps flickers on golden platters heaped with roasted meats, fresh fish, and fruits preserved in honey, filling the room with smells that mix with the faint tang of perfumed oil. Conversation is lively, layered with humor, stories, subtle lessons, and the occasional carefully placed warning or reminder of duty. Even jokes can serve as social tests, seeing who laughs, who hesitates, and who dares to challenge the status quo. But life as an empress is not all luxury. Beneath the silk and gold, there are tensions, quiet struggles that many will never see. Alliances must be maintained, sometimes through subtle gestures, sometimes through gifts or favors that ripple across the empire. The emperor's attention is both a blessing and a danger. Favor can shift without warning, and jealousy, resentment, or rumor can fester in the corridors like an unseen storm. Decisions are rarely personal, they are strategic. A smile at the wrong time can mean everything. A misstep in conversation can ripple far beyond the palace walls. Even the nights are structured, filled with reflection, prayers, or preparation for the next day's appearances. For a true empress knows that her life is a continuous performance, where every action carries weight and every silence may be louder than words. The evenings bring a quieter rhythm, yet never complete solitude. Some nights she strolls beneath the stars in the palace gardens, listening to the gentle splashing of fountains while considering the empire's politics or the loyalty of those around her. At other times, she receives close confidants, women who share insights, news, and gossip from the city beyond. And here, hidden in the soft lamplight, strategies are whispered, secrets exchanged, and alliances quietly strengthened. Sometimes, she reads ancient texts or poems, letting the words carry her to distant lands, to lives she will never lead but imagines vividly. Food, music, conversation, politics, and thought all intermingle, creating a life rich in texture and complexity. One that is both dazzling and delicate, beautiful and perilous, filled with luxury yet anchored in endless vigilance. The next morning, the palace awoke not with sudden noise but with the slow, deliberate rhythm of servants and attendants moving through marble corridors, their steps softened by rugs woven from threads imported across the empire. The empress stirred once more as sunlight filtered through high windows, casting long, warm beams across the mosaic floors that depicted battles, gods, and legends of Rome's past. She lay for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the city beyond the palace walls, the distant clatter of carts, the hum of early voices, the occasional bray of animals, all reminders that even in her gilded world, the empire's pulse never ceased. She rose carefully, aware that her movements were being noted, and she allowed herself a small, private smile, a moment of ownership over her own body, over her own choices, even if for only a brief instant. Breakfast arrived as a ritual, meticulously arranged yet seemingly effortless, with trays of delicate bread, bowls of ripe figs and dates, small pastries filled with honey, and cheeses of every texture, some soft and creamy, some firm and slightly aged. Wine diluted with water accompanied the meal, its taste delicate, warming the throat without overpowering. Conversations at this hour were light in appearance but layered in meaning. Servants whispered quietly to one another, always mindful of eavesdropping ears, while the empress engaged with her attendants, asking questions about news from the provinces, about trades and shipments, or simply about the day ahead. Each question, each nod, was both courtesy and strategy, for even seemingly trivial attention could bind loyalty or reveal dissent. After breakfast, she often walked through the palace gardens, a space where nature and human order collided in perfect harmony. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight, their waters dancing over stone basins shaped like lions or mythical creatures. Sculpted bushes, trimmed into precise shapes, lined the pathways, creating a labyrinth of both beauty and privacy. The fragrance of roses mingled with herbs carefully planted for their medicinal or culinary value, creating a perfume that was both pleasant and subtle, never overpowering. Birds, carefully chosen from distant lands, flitted among the branches, their exotic colors and songs a reminder of Rome's reach and influence. Here, the Empress could reflect, walking slowly, fingers brushing against the petals of flowers, thinking not only of her personal desires but of the empire she represented by her very presence. Visits from dignitaries, senators' wives, and influential women of Rome were a constant part of her day. They arrived in flowing robes, sometimes carrying gifts, sometimes bearing news or requests, all under the watchful eye of palace guards who ensured that etiquette and safety were preserved. Conversations were layered with subtext, compliments that concealed warnings, questions that sought to probe alliances, small gestures of deference that could sway political outcomes. The Empress listened more than she spoke, her gaze sharp, her mind cataloging information, observing gestures, noting who smiled too readily, who hesitated, who avoided eye contact. In these interactions, she was both hostess and observer, diplomat and judge, exercising influence without ever raising her voice, a silent power that shaped decisions far beyond the walls of the palace. Meals continued to punctuate the day, sometimes private, sometimes public, always elaborate. Lunch could include roasted dormice, delicately seasoned with herbs, small birds wrapped in pastry, or fresh fish brought directly from coastal markets, still glistening with the sea's essence. Spices from the east, pepper, saffron, and ginger, were sprinkled with careful precision, not only for taste but as a demonstration of wealth and reach. Eating was a performance as much as a necessity. The Empress table was a stage where the arrangement of food, the choice of utensils, the timing of gestures, all spoke volumes to those who watched. Laughter, polite chatter, and subtle flattery flowed around her, and she responded with grace, her demeanor always calm, her attention focused, yet always reserving a private judgment for each act and each word spoken in her presence. Afternoons often brought lessons, personal or formal. Tutors might arrive to teach philosophy, rhetoric, or literature, ensuring that the Empress remained educated and sharp, able to converse on any subject with dignity and confidence. She might practice music, her fingers on the strings of a lyre, or test her voice on a song learned from traveling musicians, her notes carrying lightly across sunlit rooms. Occasionally, she would practice exercises in archery or riding, skillfully maneuvering a horse through gardens or private grounds, a display of discipline and refinement that combined physical prowess with poise, reminding all who witnessed that even women of the highest station maintained strength and skill. Yet, despite the grandeur, there were quieter, more private moments that defined her life as much as ceremonies or public appearances. She would retreat to her chambers to write letters, often in code or using phrasing carefully chosen to conceal true meaning. Some letters were simple, exchanging pleasantries with distant relatives, but others carried instructions, warnings, or subtle persuasion meant to influence events far from the palace. Here, her mind could wander to personal reflection. Fears, hopes, memories of her youth before the weight of empire descended upon her shoulders. And always, she was aware of the delicate balance she maintained between visibility and discretion, between influence and submission, between desire and duty. Evenings offered a different rhythm, yet no less layered. Candlelight flickered across rooms where small groups gathered to share stories, entertain with poetry, or present news from the provinces. Music continued to flow, sometimes joined by soft singing or gentle laughter, blending with the subtle scent of perfumed oils that marked every room. Conversations were never casual, always carrying undertones of strategy, rumor, or warning, as those present measured not just the words spoken, but the weight behind them, the intention suggested by a glance or the flicker of a smile. And when the palace finally quieted, the Empress often lingered in private corridors or secluded balconies, listening to the distant city, imagining the lives of citizens far below, contemplating the empire's vastness, and sensing how intimately she remained tied to it, by duty, by expectation, and by an unspoken understanding of her place in history. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the terraces and halls of the imperial palace, the Empress moved seamlessly between her roles, her presence felt in every corridor, yet never imposing, always measured. The morning's rituals long behind her, she often retreated to a smaller, more intimate space. A library filled with scrolls, codices, and carefully preserved documents, the scent of aged parchment mingling with the faint aroma of incense from a nearby altar. Here, she could lose herself in history, in stories of past rulers and their consorts, drawing lessons from triumphs and missteps, imagining herself in scenarios both daring and delicate. The soft rustle of paper under her fingers, the faint crackle of oil lamps in the corners, and the occasional whisper of a passing servant created a rhythm all her own, a quiet heartbeat in contrast to the larger, boisterous life of the palace. In these moments, she reflected on the subtleties of court life, the power woven into silence and suggestion. A simple smile could reassure or intimidate. A word chosen carefully could shift allegiances or cement loyalty, and even a gesture of courtesy carried weight beyond immediate understanding. Every encounter in the palace was layered, and the Empress navigated them with a mind always alert, attuned to nuances others might miss. This awareness extended to her clothing, her jewelry, even the colors she chose to wear. Deep purples, golds, and reds signaling status and subtly influencing perception, while softer shades suggested approachability or restraint. The art of presentation was as vital as the art of conversation, for appearances in Rome often held as much influence as actions. Afternoons might bring formal audiences, where senators' wives, foreign dignitaries, and advisors arrived to seek favor or counsel. These gatherings were carefully choreographed, each participant aware of unspoken rules. The Empress greeted them with measured warmth, her voice calm, each word weighted with intention. Conversations flowed like carefully directed streams, weaving together information, courtesy, and subtle influence. She noted who leaned too far, who avoided eye contact, who lingered too long or too briefly, details that might seem inconsequential, but which often foreshadowed greater events. Gifts were exchanged with ritual precision. Ornate fabrics, exotic spices, rare fruits, or delicately crafted jewelry, each item chosen not only for its beauty but for the message it conveyed, and for the favor it might inspire. Meals in the afternoon were often shared with select company or enjoyed privately in contemplation. Platters featured delicacies uncommon to the streets of Rome. Tender meats, fresh fish cured or roasted with fragrant herbs, fruits from distant lands, nuts, and honey so sweet it seemed almost sacred. Wine and diluted fruit juices accompanied the feast, their subtle flavors designed to complement, never overpower. Conversations during meals balanced light amusement with caution, playful anecdotes interwoven with reminders of duty, subtle tests of loyalty, and sometimes whispered insights into matters far beyond the room. The Empress listened as much as she spoke, her mind cataloging every detail, measuring the weight of each word against the shifting landscape of the court. Entertainment flowed seamlessly into the late afternoon, often a blend of artistry, culture, and intellectual pursuit. Musicians played on lyres and flutes, their melodies rising and falling like gentle waves, filling high-ceilinged halls with sounds that seemed almost tangible. Dancers moved with precision, telling ancient stories through their gestures, their movements a language understood in subtle ways by those present. The Empress sometimes joined in song or music, not for display but for the connection to a tradition stretching back generations, a reminder of her place in a lineage of women who balance grace, intellect, and strategy. In these moments, she experienced freedom of expression, a personal space within the public world she inhabited, and yet, even here, awareness never fully relaxed. Her posture, her glance, her tone, all carefully maintained. Late afternoons often brought walks through private corridors or secluded garden terraces, where fountains whispered and the gentle trickle of water created a meditative atmosphere. She might pause to observe the careful arrangement of plants, the patterns of sunlight shifting across marble, or the quiet chatter of attendants in nearby rooms. Here, decisions about her household, her wardrobe, the ordering of food and servants' duties, or even the timing of audiences and visits were considered. Each choice, though seemingly mundane, contributed to the delicate equilibrium that maintained her influence and ensured the smooth operation of palace life. The smallest oversight could ripple outward, unnoticed in the moment but felt later in alliances shifted, favors lost, or subtle discontent sown. Evening descended slowly, the palace illuminated by hundreds of oil lamps whose flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows. Feasts stretched into the night, with dishes arriving in waves. Spiced meats roasted over open flames, fresh fish baked with herbs, vegetables prepared in delicate sauces, and sweet confections made from nuts, honey, and fruits pressed to perfection. Laughter and conversation flowed, interspersed with music, soft singing, and the occasional recitation of poetry. The Empress remained ever attentive, not simply observing but subtly guiding, ensuring that decorum, enjoyment, and subtle displays of loyalty were balanced. Guests left with impressions carefully crafted, their thoughts shaped not only by what they saw, but by the unseen calculations behind every gesture. At night, the Empress sometimes lingered in quiet corners of the palace, listening to distant sounds from the city beyond, the murmur of late-night voices, the echo of carts on cobblestones, or the faraway howl of a lone animal. These sounds reminded her that the empire extended far beyond her chambers, that life pulsed and shifted in ways unseen yet deeply connected to the decisions she made and the influence she wielded. In solitude, she could consider personal reflections. Her ambitions, her fears, the fleeting joys of family, or the quiet grief of moments lost to circumstance. Even amidst wealth, power, and attention, there remained a human heart, navigating a labyrinth of expectation, history, and desire, finding its rhythm in the interplay of public performance and private reflection. The morning light returned gently, brushing over the palace walls and falling across the intricate mosaics that had silently witnessed centuries of history, each tile telling a story in colors that had faded only slightly with the passing years. The Empress rose, as she always did, with a careful awareness of her surroundings, feeling the soft warmth of the sun on her skin through the open windows, mingling with the subtle scent of myrrh and rosewater that lingered from the previous evening. The corridors, still echoing the distant footsteps of night watchmen and the soft rustle of early servants, seemed to greet her as an old friend, familiar yet full of secrets she had yet to uncover. Even the architecture seemed alive, the marble floors reflecting light in shifting patterns, reminding her of both the beauty and the weight of her station. Breakfast unfolded quietly, yet it carried the same meticulous attention to detail that marked every aspect of her life. Freshly baked bread, soft and warm, accompanied by honey that glimmered like liquid gold, and fruits selected for their perfection. Figs, pomegranates, and sweet grapes filled the table. Small dishes of cheese, lightly spiced and aged, sat alongside nuts and olives from distant provinces. Wine, diluted with water and chilled slightly, offered a gentle start to the day, warming the throat without overwhelming the senses. Even the act of breaking bread was purposeful, the Empress mindful of each gesture, each glance, each reaction from those around her. For every small interaction was a thread in the intricate tapestry of court life. After breakfast, she often took to the gardens again, wandering along paths lined with sculpted shrubs and ornamental fountains, her thoughts flowing as freely as the water cascading from stone lions' mouths into sunlit basins. Here, in this carefully curated wilderness, she could momentarily step outside the rigid structures of palace life. Yet even in solitude, she remained aware. Birds from distant lands flitted about, their songs a gentle distraction, and occasionally, a servant would approach with a message or an item, their steps soft on the stone pathways. Each movement, each sound, seemed amplified in the quiet morning. Yet it was this very clarity that allowed her to notice the small details others might miss. The subtle droop of a flower, the slight hesitation in a servant's step, the way sunlight glinted on gold in a manner that could be both beautiful and symbolic. Afternoons brought audiences, a delicate balance of diplomacy, observation, and subtle manipulation. Women of influence, foreign envoys, and senators' wives arrived in flowing robes, each presenting themselves with a combination of respect and ambition. Conversations were never merely social. They were tests, games played with words, gestures, and fleeting expressions. The Empress listened carefully, her gaze sharp, her mind cataloging intentions, alliances, and potential threats. Gifts changed hands with ritual precision. Exotic fabrics, fruits preserved in honey, small pieces of crafted jewelry, each item a statement, a token, a subtle declaration of loyalty or desire for favor. In these moments, she moved like a conductor of invisible symphonies, orchestrating interactions with calm, unspoken authority, knowing that her silence could speak louder than words. Meals in the afternoon were often elaborate, though sometimes quieter than the morning feast, allowing reflection and conversation among select guests. Platters bore roasted meats, delicately spiced and tender, fish baked with herbs that released fragrant steam, and vegetables prepared with skillful care. Fruits preserved in honey, nuts, and pastries offered a sweet contrast to savory flavors. Every taste, every aroma, was part of a larger performance, a reminder of wealth, taste, and sophistication. Even in casual moments, the Empress observed the nuances of table manners, the way hands reached, the tilt of heads, the subtle shifts in posture, all indicators of character, loyalty, and influence. Entertainment often continued into the later hours of the afternoon, seamlessly blending artistry, intellectual pursuit, and subtle power. Musicians played with precision, creating melodies that rose and fell like gentle waves, while dancers moved with carefully rehearsed elegance, their gestures telling stories that spoke as much to the Empress as to those gathered around them. She sometimes joined in singing or music, not for display, but to connect with the tradition of women before her, to feel the pulse of a culture that stretched back generations. These moments, though beautiful, were also strategic, allowing her to gauge reactions, measure loyalty, and maintain her influence subtly, without overt force or command. Private moments in the afternoon often allowed her to write letters, compose thoughts, and make decisions that affected the daily operations of the palace. Instructions for servants, observations about the court, or messages intended for distant allies were carefully crafted. Their words measured to conceal intention, reveal nuance, or inspire action. Here, her mind could wander to personal reflection. The joys of small victories, the quiet sorrow of missed opportunities, the fleeting warmth of human connection, and the ever-present awareness of her role in shaping the empire. Even in these solitary moments, the Empress maintained a balance between personal desire and public duty, navigating a labyrinth of expectation, influence, and subtle power. As evening approached, the palace began to shift once more. Lamps flickered to life, casting dancing shadows across walls adorned with frescoes depicting legendary battles, gods, and heroes. Feasts extended into the night, their rhythm punctuated by music, conversation, and the soft clinking of utensils. Dishes arrived in careful succession. Tender meats, spiced fish, fresh vegetables, fruits preserved in honey, and delicately crafted pastries. Laughter and stories flowed, interwoven with strategic observation, subtle flattery, and quiet reminders of duty. The Empress remained at the center, attentive and poised, her presence shaping the atmosphere, guiding conversation, and ensuring that loyalty, respect, and influence were maintained without the need for overt command. The next morning arrived like a soft whisper through the palace, sunlight spilling over the columns and reflecting off the polished marble floors, creating a golden sheen that seemed almost alive. The Empress stirred from her sleep, the faint aroma of jasmine and myrrh still lingering in the air, mingling with the distant scent of fresh bread being prepared in the kitchens below. She moved with careful grace, aware that even the smallest misstep could draw attention, yet embracing the quiet freedom that each morning brought. The the fleeting moments where her thoughts could wander unobserved, where she could consider the intricacies of her life without interruption. Even as servants entered to assist with her attire, every gesture was deliberate, a combination of necessity and subtle assertion of her influence. Breakfast unfolded with precision, each item thoughtfully prepared and presented. Bread still warm from the oven, soft cheeses seasoned with fragrant herbs, olives preserved in oil, and a selection of fresh fruit arranged with an eye for both beauty and taste. Honey drizzled delicately over pastries, their crusts golden and flaky, releasing a sweet aroma that mingled with the lingering scent of wine diluted with water. The Empress tasted each bite with mindful attention, appreciating not only the flavor but the craftsmanship, the care of those who prepared her meals, and the subtle reminders of Rome's far-reaching trade and wealth. Conversations at this hour were lightly layered, seemingly casual yet threaded with meaning. Each word, each pause, could reveal loyalty, hint at desire, or conceal an agenda. The Empress listened as much as she spoke, her mind cataloging every nuance, preparing her for the interactions that would unfold in the hours ahead. After breakfast, the gardens offered a refuge, a space where she could both observe and reflect. Pathways wound between fountains and carefully sculpted hedges, sunlight filtering through the leaves and creating shifting patterns on the marble beneath her feet. Exotic birds, brought from distant corners of the empire, flitted among the branches. Their bright feathers and melodic calls a reminder of the empire's vast reach and influence. Here, she could move freely, walking slowly, fingers brushing against flowers, noting the subtle changes in the environment, the growth of herbs used for both culinary and medicinal purposes, and the whispers of leaves that seemed to carry messages from one end of the palace to another. In these quiet moments, her mind balanced reflection and strategy, considering how each day's actions, each audience and meal, shaped the complex web of loyalty and influence surrounding her. Afternoons often brought the arrival of guests, some familiar, some new, each bearing intentions hidden beneath courtesy and gifts. Women of rank, foreign envoys, and advisors approached the Empress with a mixture of respect, ambition, and calculated charm. Conversations flowed like carefully guided streams, interweaving diplomacy, subtle persuasion, and observation. The Empress spoke when necessary, choosing her words with precision, her tone calm and deliberate. Even a slight smile could signal approval, a subtle nod could imply understanding, and the smallest gesture could shape perception. Gifts exchanged during these visits were not merely offerings but statements. Fabrics of rare quality, spices from distant lands, small ornaments crafted by skilled artisans, each carrying a message of respect, loyalty, or expectation. The Empress absorbed it all, cataloging intentions and measuring influence, knowing that a single misstep or unguarded word could reverberate far beyond the immediate room. Meals in the afternoon were sometimes quieter, allowing for reflection or conversation among a select few. Platters carried roasted meats, fish prepared with aromatic herbs, vegetables artfully arranged, fruits preserved in honey, and delicate pastries. The taste, texture, and presentation all played a role in the subtle theater of influence, reminding guests of both the Empress' refinement and the wealth of the empire. Every gesture at the table, every glance and posture, carried meaning. The Empress observed the subtleties of human behavior, who lingered over a dish, who hesitated to speak, who laughed too quickly. These observations informed her understanding of the court, the alliances and tensions that shaped her world, and the delicate balance she maintained between authority and subtlety. As the afternoon wore on, she might retire to her private chambers or library, a space filled with scrolls and codices, the scent of aged parchment mingling with faint incense. Here, she could write letters, craft messages of influence, and reflect on the ever-changing landscape of palace life. Her writings were often carefully coded, designed to conceal intention or inspire action, and each decision carried weight. Even in solitude, she remained alert, aware that her choices affected not only her immediate surroundings but the empire at large. Here, in these quiet moments, she could consider her personal reflections, ambitions, memories, fears, and the rare joys of intimacy or understanding. The palace, despite its grandeur, demanded constant vigilance, and even private moments were rarely free from the influence of power and expectation. Evenings brought a shift in rhythm, the palace illuminated by hundreds of oil lamps, their flames flickering across frescoed walls depicting gods, heroes, and historical victories. Feasts extended into the night, with waves of carefully prepared dishes arriving in succession. Tender meats, fresh fish, vegetables cooked with skill and care, fruits preserved in honey, and intricate pastries that delighted both taste and sight. Music and poetry filled the rooms, sometimes joined by dance, blending artistry with social performance. Conversation flowed, a mixture of amusement, strategy, and subtle testing of loyalty and influence. The Empress guided these gatherings with quiet authority, ensuring that decorum, entertainment, and the subtle reinforcement of alliances were maintained without overt dominance. Dawn crept slowly into the palace once again, illuminating the high ceilings and frescoed walls with a soft, golden light that seemed almost sacred in its quiet intensity. The Empress stirred, feeling the faint chill of early morning air mixing with the lingering warmth of her chambers, scented with oils and flowers brought from distant gardens. Servants moved with hushed efficiency, laying out clothing that would signal both refinement and authority, their movements synchronized as if part of an unspoken choreography. She rose with deliberate care, aware that even the smallest gesture might be observed, interpreted, or remembered, and yet in these quiet moments she allowed herself a private sense of mastery over her domain. Breakfast appeared as a ritual of both nourishment and subtle display. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven, accompanied by creamy cheeses and carefully prepared olives, formed a simple yet elegant start. Figs, dates, and grapes, imported from across the empire, were arranged with a precision that pleased both eye and palate. Pastries drizzled with honey, their golden crusts flaking delicately under gentle pressure, offered a sweetness that contrasted with the lightly spiced meats or fish prepared in earlier hours. Wine, diluted with water, completed the meal, its subtle flavor warming the mouth without overwhelming it. Conversation was gentle yet layered, a blend of courtesy, observation, and the careful gauging of intention. Each word, each nod, each pause could reveal loyalty or hesitation, and the Empress listened as much as she spoke, cataloging details for use later in the intricate web of courtly life. Following breakfast, the gardens beckoned once more, a place where the Empress could move with freedom yet remain ever observant. Pathways wound between fountains whose waters sparkled in the sun, statues of gods and heroes stood silent but imposing, and carefully trimmed shrubs created both beauty and a subtle sense of order. Birds, their feathers vivid against the green, chirped and flitted among the branches, their presence a living symbol of the empire's reach. Here, she could reflect on her own role within this vast world. The quiet power of influence, the delicate balancing act of favor and diplomacy, and the constant vigilance required to maintain both personal safety and social authority. Every sound, every shift in the breeze, every small detail became part of her consciousness, a reminder that even in moments of apparent calm, life at the heart of the empire was never without consequence. Afternoons often brought visitors and audiences, a combination of diplomacy, subtle negotiation, and observation. Women of high status, emissaries from distant provinces, and influential senators' wives arrived in flowing robes, bearing gifts and intentions hidden beneath smiles of courtesy. Conversations were orchestrated with care, words carefully chosen, gestures measured, and expressions carefully controlled. The Empress responded with grace, allowing silence to convey meaning where speech might fail, using subtle glances or the slightest movements to communicate approval, warning, or curiosity. Gifts passed between her and her guests carried more than mere value. Rare spices, fabrics of unmatched fineness, and small artifacts crafted by artisans far from Rome were tokens of respect, power, and expectation, each carefully received and assessed for their significance in the ever-shifting landscape of courtly influence. Meals in the afternoon were both sustenance and theater. Platters arrived with roasted meats seasoned meticulously, fresh fish prepared with aromatic herbs, and vegetables arranged with an artistry that pleased both sight and palate. Fruits preserved in honey offered sweetness, while delicate pastries displayed skill and precision in their preparation. Every bite was experienced fully, every gesture observed, as the Empress navigated the subtle dynamics of presence and influence. Even the positioning of hands, the pacing of conversation, and the placement of dishes could shape perception, revealing character, loyalty, or intent. In this way, dining became a performance, an extension of strategy as much as pleasure. As the day progressed, the Empress often retreated to her private quarters or library, a sanctuary of knowledge and reflection. Scrolls and manuscripts lined the shelves, their inked letters whispering secrets of history, governance, and art. Here she wrote letters that could influence distant provinces, directed the operations of her household, and contemplated alliances that required subtle nurturing. Words were chosen with care, phrasing designed to conceal meaning or inspire action, and every decision carried the weight of consequence. In these private moments, the Empress considered her life in its entirety. The balance of duty and desire, the intricate dance of influence, and the small joys and quiet sorrows that remained her own, untouched by the scrutiny of the court. Evening arrived with a gentle shift in rhythm, oil lamps igniting one by one, casting dancing shadows across frescoed walls depicting battles, gods, and legendary figures of Rome's past. Feasts extended into the night, each dish arriving with deliberate timing. Tender meats roasted to perfection, fresh fish imbued with subtle flavors, vegetables crafted with skill, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries that delighted both eye and palate. Music filled the halls, soft melodies played on lyres and flutes, accompanied by dancers whose gestures told stories understood in nuanced ways by those present. Conversations interwove amusement, observation, and strategy, and the Empress, ever attentive, guided the rhythm with quiet authority, shaping both atmosphere and perception. Late at night, she sometimes wandered corridors or balconies, listening to the distant city beyond the palace walls. The faint murmur of voices, the occasional clang of a cart, and the soft calls of animals reminded her of the empire's vastness and her subtle, pervasive influence. Even in moments of solitude, she reflected on the delicate equilibrium of her life, the intertwining of visibility and discretion, influence and observation, beauty and vigilance. In this endless cycle of performance and reflection, she found both challenge and mastery, weaving each day into a tapestry of experience that was as intricate as it was imperceptible to those who did not dwell in her world. The life of a Roman empress, she understood, was not merely one of luxury, but a continuous, careful navigation of power, expectation, and subtlety, stretching endlessly through corridors, gardens, and the living history of the empire itself. The following morning unfolded with the same quiet elegance that had become the rhythm of the palace, sunlight filtering through high windows and illuminating the frescoed walls in muted golds and soft shadows. The Empress rose with deliberate care, her movements precise, measured, and observed, even in the seemingly private confines of her chambers. Servants attended her with hushed efficiency, laying out garments of fine silk and brocade, selecting jewelry that spoke both of wealth and of careful political signaling. Each detail, from the placement of a clasp to the subtle shine of a gemstone, conveyed a message of power, status, and discernment. The Empress understood that the world watched, even when unseen, and her life was a constant performance of grace intertwined with vigilance. Breakfast began with its familiar rhythm, a combination of sustenance and ceremonial attention. Warm bread, freshly baked, accompanied by soft cheeses and spiced olives, offered both comfort and indulgence. Bowls of figs, dates, and grapes from distant lands were arranged artfully, alongside pastries glazed with honey, their delicate textures contrasting with the savory dishes. Wine, diluted and chilled, accompanied the meal, warming the palate gently, complementing rather than overwhelming. Conversation during this time was lightly layered, polite yet carefully nuanced, a means of observing allies, assessing intentions, and understanding subtle dynamics within the court. Even in these moments of seeming simplicity, the Empress was attuned, noting the smallest inflections, gestures, and glances, which could reveal loyalty, ambition, or caution. The gardens called as the morning progressed, a sanctuary where she could move with freedom yet remain ever alert. Marble pathways wound between fountains whose waters sparkled with sunlight, and sculpted shrubs provided both beauty and discreet privacy. Birds from exotic regions flitted among the branches, their songs echoing faintly, carrying a sense of the empire's vast reach and influence. The Empress walked slowly, letting her fingers graze petals of carefully cultivated flowers, observing not only the aesthetics but the subtle details that signaled the passage of time and care within the gardens. These moments allowed reflection on her own influence and the delicate balance of her role, reminding her that even amidst luxury, life required constant observation, strategy, and subtlety. Afternoons brought audiences and visits, blending diplomacy, performance, and observation. Women of status, emissaries, and influential wives of senators arrived, bearing gifts, news, and intentions carefully veiled beneath courteous smiles. Conversations were measured, words chosen for their precision, gestures subtle, and silences intentionally loaded with meaning. The Empress listened attentively, responding with calm authority, allowing a glance, a tilt of the head, or a small smile to convey approval, curiosity, or caution. Gifts exchanged, whether exotic spices, rare fabrics, or intricate ornaments, were more than tokens. They were symbols of influence, respect, and expectation, each interpreted carefully and catalogued in the Empress' mind for future reference. In these interactions, she exercised soft power, shaping alliances, loyalty, and perception without overt dominance, relying on observation and subtle guidance rather than force. Meals continued to serve as both nourishment and theater. Platters arrived with roasted meats infused with herbs, fresh fish prepared with delicate care, vegetables arranged with aesthetic precision, and fruits preserved in honey for sweetness and symbolism. Pastries, intricately crafted, delighted the senses and displayed mastery of culinary artistry. Dining was a performance. Every gesture, every glance, every pause observed and weighed, as it revealed character, loyalty, and intent. The Empress maintained her composure, guiding conversation gently and ensuring the balance of decorum, subtle persuasion, and social observation was preserved throughout the meal. Each encounter was an opportunity to shape perception and maintain influence within the delicate hierarchy of the court. The late afternoon often found the Empress in her private chambers or library, surrounded by scrolls, codices, and the faint scent of parchment mingled with oils. Here she could write letters, prepare instructions for her household, and contemplate matters extending far beyond the palace walls. Each word on the page was carefully crafted, designed to inspire action, conceal intention, or maintain alliances. In these solitary moments, she reflected on her personal experiences, the small joys and sorrows of her station, the rare intimacies of trust, and the challenges of navigating a world in which every gesture could be interpreted as strategy. Even in apparent solitude, vigilance remained essential. The life of a Roman empress was as much a mental endeavor as a physical one, blending intelligence, observation, and subtle power. Evenings unfolded in a predictable yet elaborate rhythm, the palace illuminated by hundreds of oil lamps whose flames cast flickering shadows across walls adorned with frescoes depicting gods, heroes, and historical triumphs. Feasts extended late into the night, each dish arriving in deliberate succession. Tender meats roasted over open flames, fish subtly spiced and cooked with precision, vegetables presented with care, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries displaying meticulous craftsmanship. Music filled the halls, played on lyres and flutes, sometimes accompanied by dance or poetic recitation. Conversation blended amusement, observation, and subtle testing of loyalty, while the Empress, ever attentive, guided the atmosphere with quiet authority. Her presence shaped the rhythm of the evening, ensuring that loyalty, respect, and subtle influence were preserved without overt dominance. As night deepened, she might walk quietly through the corridors or stand on a balcony, listening to the distant city beyond the palace walls. The faint echo of voices, carts moving along cobblestones, or the calls of animals reminded her of the vastness of the empire and the subtle reach of her influence. In these moments, reflection took precedence. The blending of duty, power, and private desire, the intricate dance of observation and action, and the continuous negotiation of influence that defined her life. Each day, though seemingly repetitive, offered nuance, challenge, and mastery, a flowing rhythm of beauty, strategy, and vigilance, extending endlessly across marble floors, sunlit gardens, and the living history of Rome itself. Morning light filtered gently through the palace windows once again, casting a delicate glow over frescoed walls that had witnessed generations of rulers and consorts, each stroke of paint telling stories long past yet still echoing within the marble halls. The Empress rose with her customary care, mindful that every movement, every gesture, carried weight beyond immediate perception. Servants moved in quiet coordination, arranging her attire and ornaments with precision, ensuring that each element of her appearance reinforced both her elegance and the subtle authority she wielded. Even in these seemingly mundane rituals, the Empress understood the power of presentation. The way silk draped across her shoulders, the shimmer of a pendant catching the light, or the careful placement of a clasp could communicate influence, sophistication, and discernment without a word being spoken. Breakfast arrived like a ceremony, not merely sustenance but a delicate interplay of taste, artistry, and subtle messaging. Freshly baked bread, warm and fragrant, accompanied creamy cheeses and lightly spiced olives. The simplicity of the dishes contrasted by the skill of their preparation. Bowls of figs, dates, and grapes from distant provinces glistened, their sweetness a reminder of the empire's reach and the luxuries available to those in the heart of power. Pastries drizzled with honey, crisp and golden, offered a subtle indulgence alongside diluted wine, whose flavor warmed the palate without overwhelming it. Conversation during breakfast was measured yet fluid, light yet laced with observation. Every glance, every subtle inflection, every gesture was catalogued in the Empress' mind, forming a mental map of loyalty, ambition, and hidden intention. As the sun climbed higher, the gardens called, offering both a sanctuary and a stage. Marble pathways wound between fountains whose waters sparkled under the morning light, while sculpted shrubs and flowering plants created an atmosphere of cultivated elegance. Exotic birds, imported from the far reaches of the empire, flitted through branches, their vivid feathers a testament to Rome's reach and influence. The Empress wandered slowly, her fingers brushing petals, her gaze attentive to the subtle shifts of light, the slight sway of leaves, and the quiet sounds that spoke of life beyond the immediate garden. These moments of solitude were never idle. Her mind reflected on strategy, relationships, and the delicate equilibrium she maintained between power, visibility, and discretion. Even here, surrounded by beauty and calm, she remained acutely aware that the life she led was a constant negotiation of influence. Afternoons brought visitors, each interaction a careful blend of diplomacy, performance, and observation. Women of status, emissaries, and advisors arrived bearing gifts and intentions cloaked beneath courtesy. The Empress greeted them with warmth tempered by scrutiny, her words measured, her gestures deliberate. Silence often conveyed more than speech. A slight nod, a fleeting smile, or the precise placement of a hand could communicate approval, caution, or intrigue. Gifts exchanged were more than material. They were tokens of political maneuvering, symbols of loyalty, and subtle statements of expectation. Fabrics of rare quality, spices from distant provinces, small crafted ornaments. Each item was weighed for both its aesthetic and symbolic significance. The Empress absorbed it all, cataloging nuances that would inform decisions, shape alliances, and maintain her influence in the intricate web of courtly dynamics. Meals remained both sustenance and spectacle. Platters arrived with meats roasted over open flames, infused with aromatic herbs, fresh fish prepared with delicate care, and vegetables presented with aesthetic precision. Fruits preserved in honey offered sweetness, while intricately crafted pastries displayed culinary mastery. Every gesture, glance, and pause at the table revealed subtle cues about character, loyalty, and intention. Conversation flowed with layered meanings, intertwining humor, observation, and careful probing, while the Empress guided interactions with quiet authority. Each gathering was a performance, a means to reinforce alliances, test loyalty, and subtly influence perception without overt display of power. In the later afternoon, the Empress might retreat to her private chambers or library, a space filled with scrolls, codices, and the faint scent of parchment mingled with aromatic oils. Here, she wrote letters, composed instructions for her household, and considered strategies extending far beyond the palace walls. Each word was carefully chosen, phrasing calculated to inspire action, conceal intention, or maintain delicate alliances. Even in solitude, her mind remained active, reflecting on her personal experiences, the interplay of duty and desire, and the subtle art of maintaining authority in a world where observation and strategy were constant companions. These moments allowed both reflection and planning, creating a balance between private thought and public performance. The two intertwined inseparably in the life of an empress. Evenings descended with deliberate ritual, the palace illuminated by hundreds of oil lamps whose flickering flames danced across walls adorned with frescoes of gods, heroes, and legendary victories. Feasts extended into the night, each dish arriving in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Tender meats, fish seasoned and cooked with skill, vegetables prepared with precision, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries crafted with artistry. Music filled the air, soft melodies from lyres and flutes blending with the rhythmic movement of dancers whose gestures told stories and poetry recitations that evoked both history and imagination. Conversation interwove amusement, observation, and strategic testing, while the Empress guided the atmosphere with subtle authority, ensuring that respect, loyalty, and influence were maintained seamlessly. Late at night, the Empress wandered corridors or balconies, listening to the distant city beyond the palace walls. The murmur of voices, the echo of carts, and the occasional cry of nocturnal animals reminded her of the empire's vastness and the reach of her influence. In these hours of quiet reflection, she considered the continuous interplay of visibility and discretion, power and observation, beauty and strategy. Each day, though familiar in structure, offered nuance, challenge, and mastery, a flowing cycle of influence, duty, and subtle personal reflection that stretched endlessly across marble halls, sunlit gardens, and the living history of Rome itself. The life of an empress, she understood, was a delicate, intricate, and unending performance, where every moment could ripple far beyond what the eye could see. The morning arrived once more, gentle and deliberate, brushing its light across the palace walls and mosaics that had borne witness to centuries of history, each fragment of tile silently narrating tales of past rulers, intrigues, and quiet triumphs. The Empress rose with the practiced grace of someone who understood that each movement, each gesture, carried weight beyond immediate perception, even in the privacy of her chambers. Servants attended her with coordinated precision, laying out garments of flowing silk, draped and clasped in ways that both spoke of elegance and conveyed subtle authority. Every detail meticulously observed, every choice a reflection of her station and influence. Jewelry, carefully chosen, glimmered faintly in the morning light, each piece a symbol of wealth, refinement, and unspoken power. In these early hours, before the day fully awoke, she allowed herself a momentary awareness of mastery over her surroundings, a private pleasure in the deliberate control that her role required. Breakfast unfolded as both ritual and sustenance, the table a tableau of abundance and refinement. Warm bread, freshly baked, released its soft, comforting aroma, accompanied by cheeses delicately seasoned with herbs, olives cured to perfection, and bowls of figs, dates, and grapes from distant provinces, their sweetness a testament to the empire's reach. Pastries drizzled with honey glistened like golden droplets, while wine diluted with water offered a gentle warmth, a subtle indulgence to accompany the morning's conversation. Words were light but layered with observation. Every glance, every inflection, every slight hesitation catalogued for meaning. In these moments, the Empress absorbed details not just about the food or the room, but about those around her, mapping loyalty, ambition, and subtle signals that might shape future interactions in the palace's intricate social web. The gardens awaited, their marble pathways winding past fountains whose waters caught sunlight and refracted it into soft, dancing patterns. Sculpted shrubs and blooming flowers created an atmosphere of controlled beauty, a stage for reflection and quiet observation. Birds, exotic and brightly colored, flitted among the branches, their songs a reminder of the empire's vast reach and the luxury it provided. The Empress wandered slowly, her fingers brushing petals, her eyes noting the smallest details. The growth of a herb, the shift of light across a stone, the subtle ripple of water in a fountain. Even in solitude, her mind remained active, contemplating alliances, assessing loyalties, and maintaining the delicate equilibrium between power, discretion, and influence that defined her life. Each sensation, sound, and sight became a thread woven into the tapestry of her consciousness, a subtle reinforcement of the constant vigilance required by her station. Afternoons brought audiences, a blending of diplomacy, subtle negotiation, and careful observation. Women of status, emissaries, and influential wives of senators arrived bearing gifts and courtesies, each interaction a performance where intentions were veiled and messages layered. The Empress greeted them with warmth tempered by scrutiny, her words measured, her gestures deliberate, her silences intentionally laden with meaning. A slight nod, a fleeting smile, or the precise placement of her hand could convey approval, caution, or intrigue. Gifts, whether exotic spices, rare fabrics, or intricate crafted ornaments, were interpreted carefully. Their significance weighed in terms of loyalty, respect, and subtle expectation. These encounters were exercises in soft power, each interaction shaping perception, testing allegiances, and reinforcing the Empress' influence across the intricate social landscape of the court. Meals were not mere nourishment, but an extension of the ongoing performance of influence. Platters arrived with roasted meats infused with herbs, fresh fish cooked to perfection, vegetables arranged with careful artistry, and fruits preserved in honey offering both sweetness and symbolism. Delicate pastries, intricately shaped and glazed, reflected the skill of the palace's chefs and the wealth of the empire. Every gesture at the table, every glance exchanged, every subtle inflection carried significance. Conversation flowed with layered meaning, blending humor, observation, and gentle probing, while the Empress guided the atmosphere with quiet authority, ensuring that loyalty, respect, and subtle influence remained balanced and unbroken. Dining was both a necessity and a subtle tool, a reflection of the constant negotiation that defined life at the heart of power. In the later afternoon, the Empress often retreated to her private chambers or library, a space filled with scrolls, codices, and the soft, lingering scent of aged parchment mixed with aromatic oils. Here, she composed letters intended to influence distant provinces, issued instructions for her household, and contemplated strategies that extended far beyond the immediate walls of the palace. Words were chosen with care, phrasing crafted to inspire action, conceal intention, or maintain alliances. Even in solitude, her mind was active, reflecting on personal ambitions, the challenges of navigating the court, and the delicate balance of power, discretion, and subtle authority. These quiet moments allowed for reflection and planning, bridging the private and public spheres that were inseparable in her life. Evenings shifted the palace into a rhythm of deliberate illumination and artistry. Oil lamps flickered along corridors, casting moving shadows across walls adorned with frescoes of gods, heroes, and legendary battles. Feasts extended late, each dish arriving with precision. Tender meats, seasoned fish, vegetables presented with aesthetic care, fruits preserved in honey, and intricately crafted pastries. Music filled the halls, the soft melodies of lyres and flutes blending with dancers' movements that told stories through gesture, accompanied by poetry recitations evoking history and emotion. Conversation flowed with nuance, intertwining amusement, observation, and careful testing of loyalty. While the Empress directed the rhythm of the evening with subtle authority, her presence shaping perception and maintaining influence without overt command. Morning light arrived gently once again, spilling through the high windows of the palace and illuminating the intricate mosaics that told stories of Rome's victories and legendary figures. The Empress rose with deliberate care, aware that each movement, even in the solitude of her chambers, carried meaning and reflected her station. Servants moved in quiet, practiced synchrony, laying out her garments and arranging jewelry so that every piece would convey refinement, subtle authority, and sophistication. Each detail, from the precise fold of a silk robe to the glint of a pendant in the sunlight, was chosen to communicate status and taste without a single word being spoken. In these early hours, she allowed herself a private awareness of control, a fleeting pleasure in the mastery she exercised over her environment, knowing that the smallest gestures could ripple through the palace in unexpected ways. Breakfast followed a familiar rhythm of elegance and quiet observation. Warm bread, just pulled from the oven, released an aroma that mingled with the soft fragrance of cheeses seasoned with herbs, while olives, carefully cured, provided a slightly briny contrast. Bowls of figs, dates, and grapes from far provinces of the empire glimmered, their sweetness a reminder of the vast networks that fed Rome's wealth. Pastries drizzled with honey glistened in the morning light, their golden layers delicate and fragile, offering a quiet indulgence. Wine, carefully diluted with water, complemented the meal, providing a subtle warmth that eased the mind into the day ahead. Conversation during breakfast flowed lightly, polite but layered with subtle observation. Every glance, inflection, and hesitation was catalogued, forming a mental map of loyalty, ambition, and strategy that would guide the Empress throughout the day. The gardens called as mid-morning approached, a sanctuary where she could move with relative freedom while remaining acutely aware of her environment. Marble pathways wound through carefully sculpted shrubs and vibrant flowers, fountains scattered throughout the grounds catching the light and casting shimmering reflections. Exotic birds, imported from distant lands, flitted between the branches, their colors brilliant and their songs a reminder of Rome's reach and influence. The Empress moved slowly, her fingers brushing petals and noting subtle changes in the garden's layout and growth. Each detail, the sway of a leaf, the way light danced across a fountain, the quiet movement of a small animal, was observed, catalogued, and stored in her mind. Even in these peaceful surroundings, she remained vigilant, understanding that mastery of her world required attention to both grand and minute details. Afternoons often brought audiences, blending diplomacy, performance, and observation. Women of rank, emissaries from distant provinces, and advisors arrived bearing gifts, news, and intentions shrouded in courtesy. The Empress greeted each with warmth tempered by scrutiny, her words measured, her gestures deliberate, and her silences intentionally loaded with meaning. A slight tilt of the head, a fleeting smile, or the careful placement of a hand could communicate approval, warning, or curiosity. Gifts were never merely material. Exotic spices, rare fabrics, and finely crafted ornaments carried subtle messages about loyalty, respect, and expectation. Each interaction served as a study in soft power, a careful dance where alliances were nurtured, ambitions observed, and influence maintained without overt display of force. Meals continued as a form of both sustenance and subtle theater. Platters of roasted meats, fresh fish prepared with aromatic herbs, and vegetables arranged with aesthetic precision arrived in succession. Fruits preserved in honey offered sweetness and a gentle reminder of wealth, while intricately shaped pastries demonstrated the skill of palace chefs and the luxury available to those within the inner walls. Every glance, every gesture, every pause at the table was observed, revealing character, loyalty, and intentions, while conversation flowed with subtlety, blending humor, observation, and delicate questioning. The Empress guided the rhythm of interaction with calm authority, ensuring that each dining experience reinforced her influence, loyalty, and respect while maintaining the elegance expected of her station. Late afternoons often found the Empress in her private chambers or library, surrounded by scrolls, codices, and the faint aroma of parchment and aromatic oils. Here she composed letters designed to influence provinces and officials, issued instructions for her household, and considered strategies that extended far beyond the palace walls. Each word was chosen with precision, every phrase crafted to inspire action, conceal intention, or maintain alliances. Even in solitude, her mind remained active, reflecting on her personal experiences, ambitions, and the subtle complexities of power. These quiet hours allowed contemplation, planning, and reflection, blending the private and public spheres that were inseparable in the life of an empress. Evenings brought deliberate illumination, oil lamps casting flickering shadows across frescoed walls depicting gods, heroes, and legendary triumphs. Feasts extended late into the night, with dishes arriving in a carefully timed sequence. Tender meats roasted to perfection, subtly seasoned fish, vegetables presented with meticulous care, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries demonstrating both artistry and skill. Music filled the air, lyres and flutes accompanying dancers whose gestures told stories, while poetry recitations invoked history and emotion. Conversation intertwined amusement, observation, and subtle tests of loyalty, guided by the Empress' calm authority, maintaining the delicate balance of respect, influence, and social cohesion without overt dominance. Late at night, she often wandered corridors or stood on a balcony, listening to the distant sounds of the city beyond the palace walls. The murmurs of citizens, the rhythmic clatter of carts on cobblestones, and the occasional call of an animal reminded her of the empire's vastness and the reach of her influence. In these moments of reflection, she considered the delicate interplay of visibility, discretion, and authority. Each day, though seemingly repetitive in structure, presented nuance, challenge, and subtle victories. Life as an empress was a continuous performance, a flowing cycle of observation, decision, and quiet mastery that extended across marble halls, sunlit gardens, and the living, breathing history of Rome itself, where every detail, every gesture, and every word could ripple far beyond what the eye could perceive. The first rays of sunlight crept through the palace windows once more, spilling warmth over the intricate mosaics and frescoes that chronicled centuries of Roman history, each image a silent witness to the rise and fall of emperors, generals, and the women who navigated the complex corridors of power. The Empress awoke with her usual measured grace, every movement deliberate, every gesture purposeful, even in the quiet solitude of her chambers. Servants moved in synchronized efficiency, presenting garments of silk and brocade, arranging jewelry with subtle precision so that the glimmer of gold and gemstones reflected both elegance and authority. The selection of attire was never trivial. A fold of fabric, a clasp, or the shine of a pendant could subtly signal status, favor, or even intention. In these moments, she reveled in the mastery of control, understanding that even the smallest details resonated throughout the palace, shaping perception and influence. Breakfast followed, a ritual that merged nourishment with social nuance. Freshly baked bread, warm and fragrant, accompanied creamy cheeses, olives, and fruits imported from distant provinces, their vibrant colors and sweet flavors a quiet reminder of the empire's reach. Bowls of figs, dates, and grapes glistened alongside pastries drizzled with honey, golden and delicate, offering a subtle indulgence. Wine, carefully diluted with water, provided gentle warmth to the palate without overwhelming the senses. Conversation flowed lightly, polite yet observant, each phrase, glance, and gesture catalogued with meticulous attention. Even at a simple morning meal, the Empress was attuned to the nuances of loyalty, ambition, and social positioning, weaving an internal tapestry of information that would guide her throughout the day. The gardens beckoned as the morning matured, a sanctuary of beauty and subtle observation. Marble pathways twisted through flowering shrubs, fountains reflected sunlight in dancing patterns, and exotic birds flitted among branches, their vivid colors a testament to Rome's far-reaching influence. The Empress moved deliberately, her hands brushing petals, her eyes noting the smallest shifts of light and shadow, the ripple of water, and the movement of small animals. Even in solitude, her mind remained active, considering alliances, assessing loyalty, and maintaining the delicate equilibrium that defined her life. Every observation, every detail, every fleeting sound became a piece of the intricate puzzle of influence she constantly navigated. Afternoons brought audiences, where diplomacy, subtle negotiation, and careful observation merged into a delicate performance. Noble women, emissaries, and influential wives of senators arrived bearing gifts and veiled intentions, each interaction a stage upon which power was quietly exercised. The Empress received them with warmth tempered by scrutiny, her words measured, her gestures deliberate, and silences deliberately charged with meaning. A slight nod, a fleeting smile, or the careful placement of a hand conveyed approval, caution, or curiosity without the need for explicit words. Gifts, exotic spices, rare fabrics, or meticulously crafted ornaments were scrutinized not just for their material value, but for the messages they carried about loyalty, respect, and expectation. These exchanges were exercises in subtle power, testing allegiance, nurturing alliances, and reinforcing influence through observation and careful orchestration rather than overt command. Meals in the afternoon were extensions of these subtle performances. Platters arrived with roasted meats infused with aromatic herbs, fresh fish prepared with precision, vegetables arranged for aesthetic and symbolic effect, fruits preserved in honey for sweetness, and pastries crafted with intricate artistry. Every gesture, glance, and pause at the table revealed nuances of character, loyalty, and intent. Conversation intertwined amusement, observation, and gentle probing, while the Empress subtly guided the atmosphere, maintaining a balance of respect, influence, and social cohesion. Dining became a form of strategy as much as sustenance, a subtle theater in which perception was as vital as flavor. Later afternoons often found her in private chambers or libraries, surrounded by scrolls, codices, and the faint scent of parchment mingled with aromatic oils. Here she composed letters that might shift alliances or influence distant provinces, issued instructions for her household, and reflected upon strategies that extended far beyond the palace walls. Words were chosen with care, phrasing deliberately constructed to inspire action, conceal meaning, or preserve delicate relationships. Even in solitude, her mind worked continuously, balancing personal reflection with the practicalities of power, strategy, and perception. These quiet hours allowed her to weave a web of influence that connected the private and public spheres, ensuring that her reach extended beyond what was immediately visible. Evening descended, draping the palace in a softer light, oil lamps casting flickering shadows across walls adorned with depictions of gods, legendary battles, and heroic figures. Feasts extended late, each dish arriving with deliberate timing. Meats roasted to perfection, fish delicately spiced and cooked, vegetables presented with precision, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries demonstrating mastery. Music filled the air, the gentle strains of lyres and flutes accompanying dancers whose gestures told stories and poetry recitations that intertwined history with emotion. Conversations flowed with nuance, combining amusement, observation, and subtle testing of loyalty, while the Empress shaped the rhythm and tone of the evening with calm, invisible authority. Her presence directed the interactions, ensuring that influence, respect, and decorum remained perfectly balanced. Late into the night, the Empress often wandered quietly through the corridors or stood on a balcony, listening to the faint sounds of the city beyond the palace walls. Murmurs of voices, the rhythmic clatter of carts, and occasional nocturnal calls reminded her of the Empire's vast reach and her subtle, pervasive influence. In these hours, reflection became ritual, balancing visibility with discretion, power with subtlety, and strategy with observation. Each day, though seemingly repetitive, offered new nuances, small victories, and challenges, forming an endless cycle of vigilance, mastery, and reflection. The life of an empress was, above all, an unbroken performance, a flowing, continuous dance of influence, observation, and personal navigation that extended across marble halls, sunlit gardens, and the living, breathing history of Rome itself, where every word, gesture, and thought could ripple far beyond what was immediately apparent. The morning light seeped through the towering windows of the palace, cascading over frescoes and mosaics that had witnessed centuries of triumph, intrigue, and the subtle maneuverings of those who held power behind gilded doors. The Empress rose with her accustomed grace, every movement deliberate, every gesture laden with meaning, even in the privacy of her chambers. Servants moved with practiced precision, presenting silks and brocades of delicate weave, arranging jewelry so that every gemstone caught the light just so, reflecting not only elegance but authority. Even the smallest details, the fold of a robe, the placement of a pendant, the shimmer of a ring, were carefully orchestrated to convey subtle messages, and she, aware of each nuance, took quiet satisfaction in the control and influence her meticulous attention afforded. Breakfast was as much ritual as sustenance, a delicate balance of nourishment, artistry, and observation. Freshly baked bread released its warm aroma. Creamy cheeses seasoned with herbs rested beside bowls of plump olives, and fruits imported from distant provinces gleamed with vibrant color and sweetness. Figs, dates, and grapes were paired with golden pastries drizzled in honey, the flavors both comforting and indulgent. Diluted wine added a gentle warmth to the morning, encouraging ease without diminishing alertness. Conversation flowed lightly, courteous, and fluid, yet every glance, hesitation, and subtle intonation was catalogued and remembered. In these early hours, the Empress read the room, noting loyalty, ambition, and subtle alliances, weaving a mental map of influence that would guide the day's interactions and decisions. By mid-morning, the gardens beckoned, a sanctuary of cultivated beauty and quiet observation. Marble pathways wound between hedges sculpted with painstaking care, fountains scattered throughout the grounds caught sunlight, and exotic birds flitted among the branches, their brilliant feathers a testament to the Empire's reach and sophistication. The Empress moved slowly, brushing her fingers against petals and noting every shift in light, every rustle of leaves, every ripple of water. Even in these moments of apparent solitude, her mind was active, reflecting on alliances, assessing loyalty, and navigating the subtle currents of influence that flowed through the court. Each sensation, each sound, each detail was a thread in the complex web of her awareness, a reminder that mastery over her environment required constant attention, even in beauty and quiet. Afternoons brought audiences, blending diplomacy, performance, and strategic observation. Noblewomen, emissaries, and advisors arrived bearing gifts and carefully veiled intentions, each encounter a delicate dance of words, gestures, and silent signals. The Empress greeted each visitor with warmth measured by discretion, her gestures subtle yet precise, her words chosen with meticulous care, and her silences intentionally charged with meaning. A tilt of the head, a fleeting smile, or the placement of a hand could communicate approval, warning, or curiosity without the need for explicit speech. Gifts were never simply material. They were symbols of loyalty, respect, and expectation. Rare fabrics, exotic spices, and delicately crafted ornaments were examined not only for their quality, but for the intentions and subtle messages they carried. These interactions exercised soft power, shaping alliances, testing allegiances, and reinforcing influence through observation and perception rather than overt assertion. Meals in the late afternoon were extensions of this continuous performance of influence. Platters arrived with roasted meats infused with aromatic herbs, fish prepared with delicate attention to flavor and presentation, vegetables arranged with both aesthetic and symbolic intention, fruits preserved in honey for sweetness, and intricately shaped pastries demonstrating the culinary artistry of the palace chefs. Each gesture, glance, and pause at the table revealed subtle insights into character, loyalty, and ambition. Conversation, interwoven with humor and observation, was carefully guided by the Empress, who maintained the balance of respect, influence, and subtle social control, ensuring that each meal reinforced her presence and authority in the palace. Later in the afternoon, the Empress often retreated to her private chambers or the library, a quiet space filled with scrolls, codices, and the faint aroma of parchment mixed with aromatic oils. Here, she composed letters intended to influence distant provinces, issued instructions for her household, and contemplated the strategies that extended far beyond the immediate walls of the palace. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence constructed with the intent to inspire action, conceal true meaning, or preserve delicate alliances. Even in solitude, her mind was active, balancing personal reflection with the practicalities of her role. These hours offered both introspection and planning, connecting the private and public spheres in a seamless blend of influence, strategy, and vigilance. As evening approached, the palace was bathed in soft light from hundreds of oil lamps, casting flickering shadows across walls adorned with depictions of gods, legendary victories, and heroic figures. Feasts extended late, each course arriving in a precise sequence. Tender meats roasted to perfection, delicately spiced fish, vegetables arranged with meticulous care, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries reflecting the skill of the kitchen. Music filled the halls, the gentle melodies of lyres and flutes accompanying dancers whose movements told stories, while poetry recitations interwove history and emotion. Conversation was layered with nuance, amusement, observation, and subtle tests of loyalty, all carefully moderated by the Empress, whose presence orchestrated the flow of social dynamics with quiet, invisible authority. Late at night, she wandered through quiet corridors or stood on a balcony overlooking the sleeping city, listening to faint murmurs, the rhythm of carts on cobblestones, and the occasional call of animals. These sounds reminded her of the empire's vastness and her subtle, pervasive influence within it. In these reflective hours, she considered the delicate balance of visibility and discretion, power and subtlety, and the continuous negotiation of authority that defined her life. Each day, though structured with familiarity, offered nuance, challenge, and subtle victories. Life as an empress was an unbroken performance, a flowing, continuous cycle of observation, decision, and reflection, spanning marble halls, sunlit gardens, and the living history of Rome itself, where every gesture, every word, and every thought could ripple far beyond what the eye perceived. The first rays of dawn slipped quietly through the high windows of the palace, illuminating frescoes that depicted Rome's victories, legendary heroes, and gods who seemed almost to observe the lives of those beneath them. The Empress awoke with measured calm, rising as if each movement were a carefully choreographed performance. Even in the solitude of her chambers, servants attended her silently, arranging flowing silks, clasping jewelry, and adjusting ornaments with subtle precision, ensuring that every element of her appearance conveyed elegance, authority, and taste. She understood with quiet satisfaction that the tiniest detail, a fold of a robe, the glint of a pendant, the shine of a bracelet, could communicate power and intent more effectively than words ever could. In these private morning moments, she relished the control she exercised over her environment, a control that extended invisibly through the palace and beyond. Breakfast was a ritual as much as nourishment, each element carefully chosen for flavor, presentation, and symbolic resonance. Freshly baked bread, warm and soft, was accompanied by creamy cheeses, olives cured to perfection, and bowls of figs, dates, and grapes imported from the far reaches of the empire. Honey-drizzled pastries glimmered, their golden surfaces delicate and fleeting, offering both pleasure and subtle indulgence. Wine, diluted with water, warmed the senses without dulling awareness. Conversation was polite yet layered, each glance, inflection, and gesture meticulously catalogued by the Empress. Even at this seemingly mundane meal, she observed loyalty, ambition, and the subtle hierarchies of the palace, weaving a mental map that would guide her through the day. The gardens, expansive and meticulously maintained, beckoned mid-morning, offering both sanctuary and stage. Marble pathways twisted gracefully between sculpted hedges and flowering plants, fountains scattered throughout reflecting sunlight in dancing patterns, and exotic birds flitted among the branches, their vivid colors a testament to Rome's reach. The Empress walked slowly, her fingers grazing petals, her eyes noting subtle shifts in light and shadow, and her mind capturing every ripple of water, every rustle of leaves, and every movement of small animals. Even in these tranquil moments, she remained acutely aware that mastery over her world required vigilance. Observation, reflection, and subtle assessment formed the fabric of her awareness, blending beauty with strategy, leisure with meticulous attention. Afternoons brought audiences, each one a delicate choreography of diplomacy, observation, and influence. Noblewomen, emissaries, and advisors entered bearing gifts and intentions wrapped in courtesy, each encounter a subtle performance where words, gestures, and silences communicated volumes. The Empress received them with warmth tempered by scrutiny, her gestures precise, her words measured, and her pauses intentionally meaningful. A nod, a fleeting smile, or a careful placement of the hand could signal approval, caution, or curiosity without the need for explicit statements. Gifts were scrutinized for more than quality. They were symbols of loyalty, respect, and expectation. Spices from distant lands, rare fabrics, and finely crafted ornaments carried unspoken messages that the Empress interpreted with practiced ease. Each interaction reinforced alliances, tested fidelity, and asserted influence through subtle observation and nuanced social mastery rather than overt assertion. Meals remained as much an extension of power as sustenance. Platters arrived in carefully timed sequences. Roasted meats infused with herbs, delicate fish, vegetables arranged with attention to aesthetics and symbolism, fruits preserved in honey for sweetness, and intricately shaped pastries demonstrating the skill of the palace's chefs. Every gesture, glance, and pause at the table provided insight into character, intentions, and loyalty. Conversation, blending humor, observation, and careful probing, was subtly guided by the Empress, who ensured that respect, influence, and decorum remained perfectly balanced. Each dining experience became a quiet demonstration of authority, a subtle assertion of control, and an exercise in social intelligence that extended far beyond the palate. Later in the afternoon, the Empress often withdrew to her private chambers or library, a space filled with scrolls, codices, and the faint aroma of parchment mingled with aromatic oils. Here she composed letters intended to influence provinces, shaped instructions for her household, and reflected on strategies that extended far beyond the immediate palace walls. Every word was chosen with care, each phrase constructed to inspire action, conceal intention, or preserve delicate relationships. Even in apparent solitude, her mind was alive with assessment, planning, and observation, maintaining the constant balance between private reflection and public influence that defined her role. Evening descended slowly, oil lamps flickering along corridors and casting shadows across frescoes of gods, legendary victories, and historical triumphs. Feasts extended into the night, each dish presented in precise order. Tender meats roasted to perfection, fish seasoned with care, vegetables arranged with artistic and symbolic intent, fruits preserved in honey, and pastries reflecting both mastery and luxury. Music filled the halls, lyres, flutes, and the occasional drum, accompanying dancers whose movements told elaborate stories, while poetry readings intertwined history, myth, and emotion. Conversation was layered, combining observation, subtle testing of loyalty, and amusement. The Empress shaped each interaction with invisible authority, ensuring that her influence remained constant. Her presence felt even without explicit command. Late into the night, she wandered quietly through hallways or lingered on balconies overlooking the city. The soft murmur of voices, the rhythmic sound of carts on stone streets, and the occasional cry of nocturnal animals reminded her of the empire's breadth and the subtle, pervasive reach of her influence. Reflection became ritual, balancing discretion and visibility, power and subtlety, influence and observation. Each day, though familiar in routine, offered nuance, minor victories, and delicate challenges. Life as an empress was an endless performance, a continuous, flowing cycle of observation, decision, and reflection, weaving marble halls, sunlit gardens, and the living history of Rome into a single, unbroken narrative, where even the smallest gesture or word could resonate far beyond immediate perception.